All right. Welcome, everybody. We're really glad that you're here. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about community action grant success. So, this is all about like tips and tools and suggestions for writing and managing strong community action grants. You see on the screen some what we call do nows, some instructions. So, we really just encourage folks to rename yourself if your name isn't appearing as you would like to be called, but also can we associate you to an organization or with an organization or a town? So if you would go ahead and do that, there's also some instructions in the chat, and we'd love it if folks would introduce themselves in the chat. So it's like your town or your organization, your name, if you want to share your role or your title in the chat. And also, we encourage you if you want to share contact information, this will be made, we'll put it out in notes. So if there's, you don't want to share, that's totally fine. But sometimes, like, people see someone and they want to be able to connect with them about a project or something. So feel free to put contact information in the chat as well. So I'm going to keep moving right along since we have a lot to cover today. But the last thing about the chat is to use it for questions. We will be pausing throughout to take your questions, and we welcome you to come off of mute at that time to ask them verbally. But if you want to, while you're thinking of a question, just drop it in the chat. We'll collect those and we'll make sure we address them. So moving right along. My name is Gabe McPhail, as you can see from across the screen. I run a company called Resilient Communities, and I have the privilege of being the facilitator for the Southern and Midcoast Resilience Coordinator Collaborative, or SMRCC for short. I am working here today with my colleague Morgan Glenn, who's going to wave to you also. Morgan is providing our tech support today. And for those of you who don't know, SMRCC is a collaborative of four regional planning organizations in the southern and mid coast of Maine. So we serve together communities in York, Southern Oxford, Cumberland, Sagadahoc, Lincoln, Knox, and Southern Waldo counties. And the focus is supporting communities enrolling or enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership. So I want to introduce all my colleagues, but to save time, we'll skip our verbal introductions and just have folks wave as I introduce them. So we have Melanie and Karina from Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, or SMR, sorry, SMPDC. I was going to call you SMRCC, SMPDC. Gretchen and I think Sarah may not be here. Okay, so Sarah Mills Knapp is Gretchen's colleague at Greater Portland Council of Governments, and they serve communities in Cumberland County. Meg is with us from the Midcoast Council of Governments, and Meg serves Sagadahoc, Knox, and Southern Waldo County communities. And then I have my co-presenters here today. So that's Curtis and Laura from Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission. And as their name states, they serve communities in Lincoln County. So we're only missing Sarah at this point, but you've seen everyone here, and we'll make sure at some point today, probably towards the end of our conversation, that we're going to put everyone's contact information in the chat. So if you haven't connected with your regional coordinator, please do. So real quick, just wanted to talk about our goals for today and then just sort of how the time will unfold. So we know that for some of you, this might be your first community action grant. And then there's probably others of you on this call that, you've done several of these by now. But whether you're coming in for the first time looking for support and getting started, or you're just kind of looking to hone your community action grant skills, we hope that you come away today with a much clearer picture of like the steps and some tips or sort of, based on experience, tools of the trade that you can use to make your community action grant more successful. We're going to cover just a super quick overview of the grant itself, and then spend most of the time on guidance of developing a really strong proposal. We are also going to touch on what happens once you're awarded, so the contracting, the tracking, the reporting, and then the grant management itself. We're going to stop at 1 o'clock, so folks that need to end their time with us, then we'll pause for that transition before we take on some time together doing a discussion about community action grant projects. So we look forward to that and hope that you're bringing your questions, your ideas, also your experience. We really want this to be a collaborative time together. So we're hoping to learn from you as well as vice versa. So just a real quick housekeeping. Everyone probably knows all of this by now. Just stay on mute unless you are speaking, and we do encourage you to share verbal questions when we have time for questions. But again, drop those questions in the chat as they come to you. And also, we encourage you, we're going to share a bunch of links and resources in the chat today, but if you have them as well, we encourage you to share. We're going to collect all of those, and when we compile the notes along with the recording to send out to folks later, we want to include the resources that you've shared as well. So we encourage you to do that. Like I said, we're really trying to draw on the collective wisdom of the folks here today. So let's learn from each other. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and dive into some of the content. All right. We're not going to spend too much time on the grant itself as a tool, but we're really trying to focus again on developing and managing community action grants. But just some details regarding the grant. The best way to learn specifics is to review the program statement and also the most recent info session about the Community Resilience Partnership and the Community Action Grant. That we're going to provide in the chat for you. So if you haven't seen that recording, that's a great place to start and just get into some of the big picture overview about the Community Resilience Partnership, or the CRP as we refer to it. So the information that we're sharing in the chat is focused on round 6, which is the current open community action grant round. So if you are going to apply now, that's the round that you would be applying for. So along with those details, we encourage you, if you have questions, even after this workshop, reach out to your regional coordinator. That's what they're there for. They will help you hone in on, what specifically you're hoping to do with your community action grant, fill in some gaps. And then you can also connect with Ashley Krulik, who is the CRP program manager. So we're going to put her email in the chat as well. Reach out to Ashley. She's able to answer your questions, and she's going to know a lot of the specifics around navigating the grant. So let's move on to a little bit more of the details of this round 6. And again, most of this you're going to find in that webinar, but we'll just touch really quickly on them. So community action grants, just like a really super, and I consider it a low barrier grant. It's one of the more user-friendly grants from the state that you can access, and this is specifically focused on sustainability and resilience building. So clean energy projects, climate impact projects, public health related to climate risk type projects, all sorts of opportunity here for communities. And when I say communities, that's municipalities, tribal governments, plantations, townships, unorganized territories. All of these things have been specified over the years as the CRP has evolved, because communities are asking who who can apply. A single community can apply, or groups of two or more communities can apply. If you're a single community, you have the opportunity of awards ranging from 5,000 to 75,000. If you're two or more communities applying together, you can apply for funding up to $175,000. And that has improved over the years as well, with the state getting additional funding to supplement the previous grant rounds. Besides the last one, have mostly been around 50 or $125,000. So that has definitely improved for communities. And the funding goes to support mostly what people end up applying for is no match community action grants, which are projects that originate from a list of community actions. And there is a new list of community actions that's gone up from 72 different community actions to 96 community actions. And this includes a bunch of new actions as well. And if you want to take a deep dive into like what are those actions, how has this list changed from the old list, we really encourage you to look at a webinar that Ashley Krulik and Casey Zorn from the CRP presented last week, and it went over all the details about this new list. So we put that link for you in the chat, as well as a link to the new list of community actions. And make sure you're really looking at that list to see, what's there compared to what's been there before. So if your project is not based on one of these actions, that's okay, as long as it aligns with the Maine Won't Wait climate action plan. And so you'd have to justify that aligns with the plan. Those grants do require a cash match between 10 and 20%, and the program statement for the community action grant clarifies what that's all about. So just to hone in a little bit more on the deadline, Friday, August 29th. So there's still a little bit of time to work on this. 5 p.m. is the deadline. Applications submitted by email, and the program anticipates that awards will be forthcoming by mid-December, and that projects could start mid-January. So just something to keep in mind, that most applications are going to require a letter of support, depending on the nature of the project. So if you do have letters that you need to get from partners or partnering communities, make sure you're planning ahead to give folks plenty of time to do that. And also just a tip here, likely most of you do this, but good to provide a template letter of support for people, just to make their lives easier when they do that, providing a letter of support to you. And just some quick considerations of the community action grant before we get into actually developing the proposals. So this kind of goes into some of our tips and sort of learning from experience here. So, when you look at all of those community actions, and then also maybe this just from experience, but there are a bunch of different ways, your community could meet the needs that you have in terms of funding priorities. So really figure out, like, is the community action grant the best fit? The good thing it is it is pretty broad, but maybe there's another state grant that would fit your project. And so you might want to consider that grant as well. The other thing is, if you are unsure, like if this is the right grant, talk to your regional coordinator. They're going to really be able to help align your needs with the right grant that's available. So another thing to consider is, like, how much does your project cost, and is it going to exceed the $75,000 that's available to you as an individual community in the community action grant? And in that case, would you want to do what sort of is termed like stacking grants? Would you want to have multiple grants try to support a project? And so what that could look like, here's just a quick example. Like if you had a road resilience project, for example, and you needed to include some community engagement, some project management, you needed to include engineering into that project, but you know that your $75,000 isn't gonna get you everything that you need for that phase of your project. So a community that we've worked with applied for an Island Institute Shore Up grant. So they got that to do project management. They applied for a coastal community grant, which covered the engineering portion of the project. And then they used their community action grant to do another piece of the engineering and then to hire someone to do community engagement. So they managed to kind of put all these grants together to fund a larger project. But just some things to keep in mind if you're going to sort of do that stacking piece, that you need to make sure that the funding can go with another proposal. So that just means you want to check with the grant program administrators before you make that determination. You can also check with your regional coordinator. A good rule of thumb is that community action grants, they do work well with a lot of other state grants. It's just you really want to double check that the other state grant is going to work well with the community action grant. So sometimes too, just thinking like if this feels like unruly or unmanageable in any way because of capacity, or it's like managing one grant is pretty much what your community is able to do, really think about phasing your project. So just do one step at a time, one grant at a time, because the grant management, you're going to be doing reporting, tracking expenses, documenting. And so it's a lot. And then if you have multiple grants going at one time, again, talk to your regional coordinator because you might want to build in project management or grant management into your proposal. And then oftentimes your regional coordinator might be able to offer some level of service in that regard too. So make sure to talk to them. All right, before we jump over into the developing a strong proposal, I just want to see, did anyone have any questions about what's been shared so far? I'm sure a lot of it's stuff you already know from the detailed pieces of watching the webinar about the community action grants, but anything from folks before we jump on? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Great. Thank you, Gabe. So we're going to start by diving into the application itself. So when you find the application, you'll find it embedded within the program statement on page 14 of the document. So throughout this presentation, we'll provide some of our tips and best practices for developing a successful application. When developing your successful proposal, you'll want to provide accurate, thorough, clear, but succinct responses to all parts of the application. You'll want to think about the application, how the application is scored, and make sure that you're spending ample time developing and refining the parts of the application that carry the most weight. To do this, you can reference the table on the right-hand side, which is a simplified table of the scoring criteria. So if you're careful and accurate with the criteria 1 through 5, you should be able to achieve the maximum points that are available to your community for the application. And as you can see, there's a total available points of 105 points. So we're going to skip over the first few pages of the application. So since those are the signatory and authorization pages, and they're usually pretty straightforward, but if you run into any questions, please check in with your regional coordinator for that process. Starting on page 3 of the application, you'll see the start of a series of criteria questions. Most of these are simple yes and no items, but let's look at 2 that need a little more thought. You can see them on the right-hand side here. Criteria 2 looks at your community's previous CAG status. If you already have an active CAG project, this is where you'll need to briefly explain the steps you're taking to finish it on time and how you'll manage another grant if this new project is awarded. The CAG reviewers will pay close attention to this question, especially if you'll be managing more than one grant at once. So you'll want to be clear about how you'll handle multiple grants successfully at a time. This doesn't need to be long, but you'll want to just but you'll want a few clear points to show that you have a plan and the capacity to deliver multiple grants at a time. So regardless of what type of project you have, you'll likely be spending the majority of your time developing the scope of work portion of your application. Here we'll look at some tips and best practices for each of the scope of work components, starting with a simple and unified way to structure this section. Here on the right-hand side, you can see the project description. For this portion, you'll want to start with a narrative overview of your project. This should include a general project description, and if you'd like, you can briefly touch on the project background and justification, though those details can also go in the project needs section. The goal here is that someone who knows nothing about your project can read this section and overview and come away with a clear understanding of what your project is about. After your narrative overview, you can list out your tasks by number, followed by the action steps of the task, and then followed by the outcomes or deliverables. Keep in mind that succinct is better than verbose, and to keep it simple and to the point. For each task, make sure the action steps and deliverables are clearly defined and ordered, and be clear about who's responsible for what without going into great detail. You will define roles and responsibilities in the project management section later on in the application. If you're using a proposal or estimate from a vendor or firm, you can use their scope of work as a starting point to build on your own. Here we have the timeline, which is also included in criteria 5. As you plan your project tasks, you'll want to think carefully about the timeline and what's realistic. It's always better to give yourself extra time to allow for unexpected delays rather than cutting it too close. The community action grants can run for either 12 or 24 months. A simple short-term project like installing a heat pump will likely need less than 12 months, while a larger effort like a community-wide planning process might require the full 24-month process. The key is to match your timeline to the amount of work that your community's capacity to get it done. If your project is a stepping stone to a larger effort, like an assessment or engineering work for a future phase, there's an extra layer of timing to consider. Those are things like, will you need to apply for another grant for the next phase, or making sure that your CAG deliverables are finished in time to support that next application. If you're planning to put a funding article for the next phase on your town warrant, you'll want to schedule your project so you'll have the necessary information ready by the town meeting time. So I'm going to pass it off to Curtis to talk a bit about the project need.
Thanks, Laura. So the project needs section is where you dig into the why behind your project. Why is the project needed? How does it benefit the community? Why is it important right now? Does it connect to your community's climate and resilient goals? Is it part of a broader plan? Or is it a step in a larger planning or implementation effort? In this section, you're justifying the project. You're telling the reader why it matters. This isn't just important for a successful grant proposal, it's also critical for a successful project. You'll need buy-in from elected officials, staff, and the broader community to make the project run smoothly. Use your proposal development time to get everyone on board. Show how the project connects to the community priorities, whether that's your comp plan, a climate plan, or another shared goal, or another shared goals. As the grant writer, you're not just in charge of getting the state on board with the project, you also have to get your own municipal government or possible volunteers on board as well. Part of a successful proposal is proving that you'll have taken the time to do this work. When people see the project as part of a larger community vision, they're much more likely to be excited about it and eager to help make it happen. So the project outcomes section is where you describe what your project will accomplish. For energy saving projects, this could include cost saving, reduced energy usage in kilowatt hours, gallons of fuel saved, or renewable energy generation. Be sure that when you do this, that you estimate these outcomes and that you show how you came up with these numbers and metrics. If you have a proposal from a vendor, energy and cost savings are often included in their proposal, And you can also request that they provide this information if it's not already there. For resiliency projects, outcomes might include being better prepared for extreme weather, managing sea level rise, or increased resources for vulnerable community members. If your project is part of a broader planning effort or a step in a larger implementation, make it clear what this phase will achieve in relation to the big picture. It's important to ask, will this project lead to another application, either another CAG or a different grant for next steps? And if so, be sure to point out that connection in your grant application. So for project management, as we mentioned earlier, CAG reviewers will focus on your capacity to carry out your project successfully and on time. This section is an opportunity to demonstrate that. Clearly, the goal here is to clearly explain who is involved in your project, what they'll be responsible for, and how their roles will contribute to getting the work done and achieving the project outcome. Whenever it's possible, it's always best to name people and entities rather than leaving them vague. The goal here is for the reviewer to understand who is doing each task and their connection to the town and the project. You want to make sure that you mention if a community volunteer, town staff, or a hired consulting or contractor will be taking on different phases of the work. A simple way to do this is to go task by task and note which actions are covered by whom. You can also mention whether capacity is being provided in kind or if it's paid. While the budgeting will include details like this, you can also lay out the groundwork here. And finally, for community access and engagement, this is a critical part of your project proposal and should be carefully considered and is not left as an afterthought. In this section, the goal is to describe how the community will be involved and how they will directly benefit from the project, especially underrepresented and more vulnerable community members. You can also explain how your project involves and benefits priority populations as defined by the Maine Climate Council. We just shared a link in the chat to an equitable engagement worksheet and a CRP webinar. Both are great resources for strengthening this section and understanding more vulnerable and underrepresented priority populations. If you're concerned about lacking connections or capacity to do engagement work on your own, consider partnering with local organizations or groups that already have these populations. For example, a church group, climate action group, or a land trust. They can even be written into your grant as a partner in your engagement efforts. Please reach out to your regional coordinators if you're unsure how to approach the community access and engagement section in your project. So we'll pause here quickly and see if anyone has questions on this section.
Curtis, not on this section, but just wanted to address a general question coming from Mary asking if the CRP funds are federal or I should say the community action grant funds are federal or state because their community has an interest in matching a federal grant with some local match. And so I'm going to encourage my other regional coordinator colleagues to come off mute if they have a different answer. But in general, the idea is that a community action grant is permissible for federal match. However, some of the community action grant funds are federal. So you just really want to, for your specific proposal, you would want to check with Ashley at the state and make sure that that there isn't a conflict. You may even she may even put it back to you to connect with the federal funder to find out, if the federally funded grant that's supporting the community action grant can play well with the grant that you're applying for. So just double check is the point. But in general, communities have used community action grants to match federal funds. Does anyone else have a different answer than that or want to add to that? Okay. I don't know if there's any other questions. I kind of jumped in there. I apologize, Curtis.
Great. I'll take over to talk about the budget section. So when we're looking at the budget, this section is worth 25% of your total score. So it's really important to take your time with it. You're going to be completing a budget worksheet, which you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is where you'll list the cost for each task and within your scope of work. You'll also be completing a budget narrative as well, which explains how those costs were determined. Here you'll include details like your rates, your estimated hours, and your vendor quotes where applicable. You'll want to make sure that your math is accurate and that your numbers are consistent throughout the application sections, and that your budget narrative lines up with your budget worksheet. For this, you'll want to go task by task in your narrative to show how each item or person contributes to the total cost. Here, you'll only want to include costs and match contributions that happen within the grant period. Anything that happens before or after is not eligible. When you're looking at energy-related projects, you'll want to check to see if there are any Efficiency Maine incentives available. If so, you must include them as part of your overall budget. This is explained in greater detail in the program statement. You can get a quote from licensed Efficiency Maine vendors. Morgan's going to be dropping a link in the chat where you can learn more about this and find those licensed vendors. You'll want to make sure that the quote shows the total project cost minus those incentives or rebates when you're looking at those energy-related projects. Your grant request will then be for the remaining cost after those incentives. You'll want to include the vendor quote with your application as an attachment. These can take time to get, so you'll want to start reaching out to vendors early. The proposal should guide the project and is essential to building a strong budget, so it shouldn't be an afterthought. If you're unsure how the Efficiency Maine guidelines can apply to your project, you can reach out to your regional coordinator or Ashley Krulik, which her contact information was dropped earlier in the chat. So once you've completed your budget and your application, you'll be getting ready to submit your proposal. You'll want to give yourself some time before reviewing it so you can come back with fresh eyes. You'll also want to take an opportunity to ask others to review it as well. If you give enough notice, your regional coordinators can look it over and provide feedback as well. Take this time to read the program statement again and make sure that you followed all the instructions and included everything that's required, including letters of support from any partners and vendor quotes that you've received throughout the process. Remember that your proposal must be emailed as a single PDF file that's no larger than 20 megabytes. If you're not sure how to create this type of file, you can always ask for help. You'll want to give yourself plenty of time to submit before the 5 p.m. deadline on Friday, August 29th, in case you run into any tech issues, lose power, or face any other unexpected challenges. So you'll always want to plan ahead to avoid those last-minute issues. And we'll again pause here for any questions. And feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute or raise your hand.
Hey, Laura, this is not a question. I just was thinking it might be good to mention, and we can add this information to the chat once we grab the link. But just there's which something folks may be familiar with, which is called direct pay, which is related to your energy projects. And we talked about, Laura talked about the Efficiency Maine rebates and incentives. If you are eligible for direct pay, which essentially is like a tax credit that nonprofits and local governments can receive for particular energy projects. And again, we can pull that a link to that information and put it in the chat if folks are unfamiliar with it. But anyway, it's something you can also show on in your budget as going toward the cost of your project. So if you want to learn more about that and how that can relate to your project, and if you want to show that in your project proposal, talk to your regional coordinator. They can help you sort through that and what it looks like. But we'll put the direct pay, some info about direct pay in the chat so you have that link.
Great. Yeah, I did see Morgan did drop that in there. So there's some information in there. Thank you, Gabe. I am going to pass it back off to Curtis to talk about post awards.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. So for post awards, now that you've been awarded your grant, we're going to talk about a few important next steps to help your project get started smoothly and ensure everyone involved understands their roles and responsibilities. So first, you'll need to sign an agreement with the state. Be sure to do this promptly so that your project can begin on time once the contract is executed. If you have project partners, it's a good idea to have either a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, for community and in-kind partners, or a service agreement or contract for anyone providing services for a fee. These agreements should clearly outline the service period, the roles and responsibilities, rates, payment terms, and any other key details. If you need examples of agreements or MOUs, please reach out to your regional coordinators and they'd be more than happy to help. And I did just want to mention that typically contractors and vendors will provide you with their own service contracts instead of providing one to you. And finally, we're just going to talk about tracking and reporting. So submitting quarterly progress reports and a final report is a requirement of receiving a CAG award. Reports can be simple and just use bullet point lists for each task to share updates on progress and outcomes, but they should also be clear and comprehensive. They should show how you're meeting your tasks, deliverables, and outcomes. It's always good to highlight key successes, flag any challenges, and note any areas of concerns in your grant progress. The goal is to provide a clear picture of your progress to someone who's completely unfamiliar with your project. You'll need to track grant expenses by each quarter and provide a final accounting of expenses by task in the final report as well. To make reporting easier, review the quarterly and final report templates before you start your project, so you know what information you're going to need to include in those documents. Setting up a system for tracking expenses and in-kind hours early on and take regular project notes that you have details ready for each quarterly reports is always best practice. And for example, these practices will save time and also give you helpful content to share with your community for outreach. There may be additional reporting requirements for federally funded projects, and if that applies to your grant, you'll be notified after the award is made. And we'll share the most up-to-date version of the quarterly and final report template in the chat. Perfect. So we're going to pause again here for any questions.
Again, I don't have a question. I'm not seeing any questions, but I noted this in the chat is that if people do go to the link to the grant report that we provided, just note like this is the grant report for round 6, which is sorry, for round, I said it was round 6, round 5, which is the currently active grant. Round 6 will likely be the same as this one that you see, but just don't go off of this if you're like, I lost my grant report, I'll go to this template, because you want to make sure you're using the template that comes with your grant award. So if you are awarded a community action grant, you will receive that grant contract, and as part of that, you'll get your reporting template. So use whichever one you get, because it could change, and does change, and could change from round to round. So just something to note there.
There is one question in the chat from Nikki. Is there a place where you can find stackable grants for action items beyond planning, such as construction and implementation? I'm going to ask my SMRCC cohorts and see if they have any suggestions for this question.
Well, I'm going to jump in and invite, and again, yeah, and Curtis, thank you, invite our SMRCC colleagues to join us in this. But yeah, I mean, there are lots of places where you can find this information. We I'm gonna point to like our newsletter and our website. We publish a monthly list of active curated grants, federal and state and philanthropic, that you could, comb through and see. Talk to your regional coordinator, I would say, because they're gonna be able to tell you what isn't currently active that might be something that you could look at for the future, and something that you could plan ahead with. Meg, I see you're off mute, so I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking, a lot of times they are, they're so different. So it is good, just feel free to give us a call and we can talk about your scope because what might be right for construction for one project, wouldn't be right for the other one. So we can really give you custom knowledge to help figure out your grant situation.
Other questions? We have time, so don't be shy. I see so many folks are not on screen, so I encourage you, um, if you're not shy, or not to be shy, and come you can come off and ask your questions, or maybe you can share some things with us. We might actually jump into our discussion sooner because I think we've presented the content that we want to present. So we may transition into our discussion if folks do not have any more questions at this point. Again, you can put those in the chat, or you can put them, or just come off of mute and ask those questions. All right, well, I'm not hearing any questions from folks. So I think what we'd like to do is if you would like to stay on, what we wanted to do is talk about hopefully your specific community action grant projects or your proposals that you're working on, maybe some particular challenges that you're having, but also just welcome folks to also share your own tips, guidance, things that you've learned from experience. And certainly like the SMRCC folks here can do the same, like, sharing particular community stories around projects that might sort of highlight some of those project examples that are interesting, as well as tips and things that we've learned through the grant writing process for community action grants. So first, I'm going to just open it up to folks who are still here with us and see if anyone wants to come off of mute and ask questions, or just talk about your project, or again, share some of your best practices and tips. Open invitation. It's very quiet. So I'm gonna put SMRCC folks on the spot and just invite anyone who may want to share some successful project examples, or any of your tips or things that came up for you that while we were talking that we didn't cover that you think we should.
I'll just echo reaching out to vendors and firms as early as you can. Especially this summer, I feel that we noticed it a lot last summer that there was a bit of a lag time hearing back from Efficiency Maine qualified vendors, especially if you're in more of a rural area where there's not as many licensed vendors. So you want to be very proactive with that, especially if you're in more of a rural area with not as many licensed vendors. So that's something you really want to be on top of. And I just want to echo that.
Thanks. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, really good point. Others?
One thing I wanted to chime in about is that we've had a number of communities have a lot of success with applying for one community action grant for multiple different projects, and that's something that's super unique about the community action grant program is you can stack projects. So, for example, the town of Berwick applied for one grant to do both an open space plan and to build infrastructure for their community garden. So, a planning and an implementation project. So if you feel your community has a couple small projects that you are interested in taking on at the same time, that is a really great option that this grant opportunity allows.
Thanks, Karina. I think that's a really good point. Can you say any more too about, is it better for the projects to be connected in some way, or can they be like totally disparate projects?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's always nice to have them be connected, but I do believe it's okay for them to be totally separate. I think what's just most important is explaining how your community or the folks supporting your communities will provide you with enough capacity to take on both and do both within the 2-year grant period.
Great, thank you. Others?
I'll go. I'll reiterate the idea about including people in this grant application process. It's such a good time to like figure out what the project will be. And if you get your partners in, they may have some ideas and things that will strengthen your application. So, and giving them, enough time to be able to weigh in and, sort of develop it together is going to be better for than, you don't want to be springing a new project on your town and surprising anybody. I know that doesn't go over sometimes. So I would say use this. And it's just really a way to be communicating. So like a contract is a way to be communicating between two partners. So this is this application is a great way to be able to communicate not only with GoPIF, but other people in your town.
I just wanted to thank you, Meg, for providing that. I also wanted to jump off the back of what Gabe had asked the question of, do they need to be connected if they're smaller projects? Most recently, the town of Cumberland submitted for projects that were not similar and or similar in that they all had like ties to the list of community actions and like the larger goals of Maine Won't Wait, but it was like solar panels, EV chargers, heat pumps, and then local food production tools. So there, it's it's kind of different or different enough that I think a well completed and written application, those can get funded.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for the example. And thanks so much, Meg, for sharing that. And I was thinking like piggybacking on that of the yeah, the like more people involved in like that planning and project development process really we talked about this in the content that we presented, but just like there's a idea of you're not just like getting this grant for assuming if it's related to some larger community goals, that you need to sustain it. And so having more people involved and knowledgeable about the project itself, because especially like if staff, turns over or elected officials, they're no longer serving in that same position by the time the award comes. I think we've seen examples where only a few people really know about it or have kind of bought into the idea, and then it gets to oh, here's your award, and folks are like, well, whose project was this and what was it for, because that sort of foundation or tie-in to broader goals wasn't there, so no one really knew about it, and it just becomes harder then to like execute that project and have that buy-in. So I really echo what you're saying about taking the time to like co-develop and have more, I would say like more project partners or people at least like involved in some skin in the game. And I did just want to mention too that in relation to the memorandum of understanding that Curtis was talking about, so we've seen that, and I think the community action grant sort of advises joint projects. So if you have a multi-community project, that there's a memorandum of understanding between the community that's applying for the grant and then the partner communities. And I've seen examples where communities like, oh no, I know the town, like we work really well together, no problem. Well, what happens when that person leaves? If the town manager leaves or, the town admin leaves, then there's a lot of vagueness around like who was going to do what and who, so if you have that documentation, regardless if you're best pals with all the other town managers that you're working with or admins or city council folks or whomever, that will really lay as your foundation and institutional knowledge, especially if you have like a 2-year project. You'll want to know go back to what you all said you were going to do and what you're going to be responsible for. So it kind of again gets a little piggybacking on what you said, Meg, around the more people sort of knowing about something and being involved and developing something. But another good reason to have a memorandum of understanding. It's easy to forget who's going to do what. Other things that folks want to ask, come off of mute and ask, or turn it back over again to the regional coordinators here. And I know there's other regional coordinators that are on this call right now. So if you have questions or things that you want to share from your own experience, we really invite you to do that as well. Hopefully the silence is because everyone is fully confident and is excited about moving forward with their grants. You've gotten all the information you need, or you have all the information you need. Again, I just like folks, if you have any additional questions, things that come up. I mean, I think the best piece of advice I have is like always reach out, just ask. Regional coordinators primary role is to ensure that your projects are successful and to help you get to that next phase of whatever it is that you're trying to do related to your community and climate resilience goals. So the Community Action Grant obviously is a focus since we're working within the Community Resilience Partnership, but I mean, they're so knowledgeable about all types of other grants. So when it comes to the stacking grants, and then that question Nikki asked and that Meg answered, it's like you want to know about other grants, just reach out. We've put the contact information for all the SMRCC regional coordinators here in the chat. You have the link to our website, which also has a bunch of resources on it. And I will say too, on the website there are community profiles, and those are all of the SMRCC communities that are enrolling or have enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership. You can see what their projects were. Oftentimes we include the end result or the deliverables of those projects if they were plans or reports. Sometimes we have like example RFPs or that's a request for proposals. If there's things that you're looking for, again, reach out to your regional coordinator. They'll be able to help you. I'm going to put out one more call for either regional coordinators to share or say any last words. And then I'm also going to say, I'm sure people aren't sad if we end early because it's a nice day and I'm sure everyone has plenty to do. So anything folks want to share before we wrap it up? All right. Well, I will just thank again Morgan and Curtis and Laura. Thanks for partnering on this, and thank you SMRCC team. And thanks everyone who took time to stay with us and be part of this conversation. And we again welcome you to reach out, connect with us if you have more questions. And we will follow up with a page that has a link to this recording if you want to refer back to it. It'll also include all of the links we share and contact information as well. So enjoy the rest of your day and good luck with your community action grants. Can't wait to see what your projects are. Thanks, everyone.